Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with my second and final August wrap-up. I will link part 1 down below, and I will list all the content warnings for books I'm going to talk about and all the people, channels, videos I mention. I have quite a few things to talk about, but a lot of them are quite short, because as I was participating in the Amazing Readathon, we had a weekend where the goal was to basically read just a lot of things, so there's a lot of short things. And I also want to mention that in my TBR video for the raising money for Hawaii readathon, I mentioned that I might extend that a little bit, and that is what I ended up doing, so I will kind of check back in with that in a future wrap-up. So the next book I finished was A Beautiful Curse by Kenley Davidson. This is the 4th book in the Entwined Tales series, which is a series of fairy tale retellings, like fantasy romance fairy tale retellings. They don't get spicy if that is something that you're looking for, but they are primarily focused on the romance as well as the fantasy kind of background, and these are all by different authors, and they're all different fairy tales that are being retold here. This one is The Frog Prince, and I think it's funny because I've read a few things by Kenley Davidson at this point, and I think it's funny that the two that have worked for me the best have been her Frog Prince retellings. I just think that's kind of interesting, especially because that's not a fairy tale that I often seek out. But anyway, so we are following our main character, whose name is Ellie, and her, all the children in her family have basically the worst fairy godfather. He hates his job, he hates them, he's forced to do nice things for them, and even the gifts that he gives that you'd think would be good turned out to cause a lot of trouble. And Ellie was gifted with beauty, really extreme beauty, to the point where it's it can be distracting for people. She's constantly being hounded by men who want to marry her, and she especially doesn't like this because she's really an introvert, and she just wants to be left alone to, read her books, which relatable. And so Ellie, her full name is Elisette. She ends up going to the Royal Library to get a job as a scribe, and she ends up on kind of a trial period, but she's really excited to work here. But then some magical shenanigans happen, things go wrong, and she ends up being turned into a frog. And she also ends up making friends with, crossing paths with one of the younger princes of this kingdom, and the book is about their relationship. It also involves kind of the line of succession. The king is getting ready to kind of name his heir, and it's not necessarily going to be the eldest son, so that is part of the plot as well. And I ended up really liking this one. I was kind of frustrated in the first chunk of this because there's a strong not like other girls vibe, which is something I've noticed that Kenley Davidson does a lot, and I don't love that. But I do feel like that mostly got fixed as the book went on. And I overall had a good time with this. I liked the romance a lot, actually. I thought the interactions between the characters were really good. I thought the fairy tale elements were really interesting and really clever. In all the books I've read by this author so far, even the books that I haven't enjoyed overall as much, I do really like the way that she interprets fairy tales. I just think she's very clever with that. So overall, I had a good time with this. There were some parts of the plot that interested me less than others, or that I liked less than others, but in general this was a pleasant surprise because, again, I've had mixed experiences with the author, and I didn't have a good first impression of this book because of the way that other women were talked about, but that did get better, and I gave A Beautiful Curse 4 stars. Next I finished Melissa by Alex Gino. This was known by a previous title, but the name of the book has been changed to reflect the name of the main character, which I think is great and makes a lot of sense. And the author, Alex Gino, actually talks about in an author's note kind of why that process happened and why they didn't start out with a different with the book being called Melissa. So this is a middle grade novel about a young transgender girl who is trying to get other people to see her as a girl, and she really wants to play Charlotte in the play version of Charlotte's Web, but her teacher doesn't want to cast her because she doesn't see her as a little girl. And so our main character Melissa is determined to get the role, and she also is kind of starting to explore ways of expressing herself that more truly match who she is. And I feel like this book has gotten a lot of attention for all the great topics it handles, and I think it's well deserved. This was really, really lovely. I really loved Melissa as a main character. I really felt for her. I think this is such a valuable book for the way that it puts you in Melissa's head as she is having these thoughts and coming to these realizations about herself, or trying to show other people what she knows about herself. And I think that's such a valuable thing for maybe kids who are reading this and who maybe this is their first exposure to a transgender character. I think it's just really great that obviously this centers Melissa's story, and it makes as much as it is possible for somebody to understand that. It makes it easier because of the way that the story is written. I thought some of the friendships were lovely, and just the support in this book I think is really wonderful. Obviously not everybody is as accepting as they should be, but in general it is a really hopeful and lovely book, and I really loved it. I thought it was wonderful. I also listened to this on audio. The narrator was Jamie Clayton, and I thought they did a wonderful job as well. So I gave Melissa 5 stars. Next I finished Lily by Holly Webb. This is the first book in a 4-book series by her. I have read a couple other series by Holly Webb, and this one is set in the same world as her Rose series, and I think there might be a couple of characters that overlap, but I don't think they're like connected series you have to read in a certain order. So our main character is of course Lily, and in this world magic is outlawed. Lily's family hide away in a crumbling house while her older sister Georgie is trained secretly in magic. But then Lily ends up finding out some really, really horrible things that their mother is planning to use Georgie for, and Lily ends up escaping with Georgie, and so the story is about kind of what they figure out about their family, about what's going on, about what Georgie was intended to do or be used for. And so they end up running away, and that's kind of like where the book starts. And this was not my favorite of Holly Webb's books. I have overall really enjoyed the things I've read from her, and this isn't to that level for me, but I liked it well enough. There's also a really adorable pug on the cover here, if you can see that, and they were a wonderful character too. I think the main thing is that the plot didn't pull me in as much with this one, and also I didn't love the characterization of some of the main characters as much, and like kind of their relationship. So we're following Lily as the main character. She's the younger sister of Georgie, and I feel like the narration and Lily herself were pretty judgmental of Georgie in ways that I found kind of frustrating and cruel even. I don't know, it was mean-spirited, I think, because the things that Georgie has gone through are like horrifying, and there's also a magical element that has kind of made her the way she is and made her like, it just bothered me the way that people were acting like she was like overly, I don't know, like a scaredy cat, and it just like the things that happened to her and the fact that she has been under these spells and she's been having these things magically done to her for so long. It just doesn't seem fair. So that like really distracted me throughout the book because I just thought that was so mean and unreasonable. But I did enjoy kind of the things I usually enjoy about Holly Webb's books. I like the writing. I think the world she creates is really interesting. And I also think the tone of her books, at least the ones that I've read so far, has been a really, really interesting like balance or combination, because there is a kind of lightness to the quality of her writing. It's very pleasant to read, and there are plenty of moments of humor. There's a lot of heart in her stories, but there's a lot of darkness as well, and especially in kind of the setup of her books and in like the stakes of her books, I think can be much darker than you might expect from the premise or from like the intended age for these books, which I think is around, yeah, it says 9 and up, which is interesting because like the things that they find out about what was intended for Georgie are pretty horrifying. But I do think that the tone is well balanced in this book, even though there are those kind of, not extremes, but like highs and lows of like how intense or scary things get. Nothing is ever like graphically depicted or anything, but I just think it's interesting to notice that tone in her books. And I also did really enjoy some of the supporting cast, and I like that, like they end up like taking shelter at a theater for a while, and so that was cool. So like I had a good time with this, just not my favorite of her books, and I gave Lily 3.5 stars. Next I finished The Tears of a Dragon by Intisar Kanani. This is, I think, the only other short story that is currently out in the world of her A Darkness at the Door series, and I finally read it. This one follows the younger sister of this family. Her name is Bean, or that's like her nickname, and it's basically the story of how she shouted a dragon out of the sky, which is something that we hear about in other books. And so we finally get the story of how that happened here, and I love this. I've loved everything I've read by Intisar Kanani. I think the sister relationships really, really shine in this story. I thought that the plot was really engaging, and I really like the way that the sisters like work together in this, and like the way that they support each other in their ethics and in what they stand for, and they also look out for each other and they talk them out of doing things when they need to. I just think that was done really well. So yeah, I thought this was great, and there were some moments of humor too that I loved. Bean is wonderful, as are all of these sisters, the 3 sisters in this family, and I give Tears of a Dragon 4 stars. I really hope we get like a story or like a whole novel about the older sister. I feel like that could be really good. Next, I finished another very, very short story. You can tell we're in the section of reading all the short things. And so I'm going to hold up The First Chill of Autumn by W.R. Gingell, even though I've already read this book, because the short story I read is at the back of this. It's like included as bonus content. And I don't even know if there's like an official title. It's just like a story of Fancy and Carmine or something. And so Carmine is a character that we know from the series who is a piece of work, and I still love him. Like, he's a very charming but also could be very annoying character, but I still love him anyway. And so it's a short story following him and one of his, I don't know, attendants, I guess you could say. Her name is Fancy, and she really like holds her own. Like, I feel like the story did a pretty good job of addressing like the power imbalance between them, which I feel like in a lot of cases W.R. Gingell does well, but occasionally it doesn't work for me. But this is one of the ones that did, and I just enjoy Carmine. I love Fancy as well. I loved their dynamic and their relationship. I loved seeing how competent Fancy is, even in ways that like Carmine had no idea she had. It was just very fun, and I really liked it. I also appreciate that the story's ending actually kind of refers to or deals with the potential problems in ages with these characters, or the fact that like one of them would age and the other wouldn't, because I feel like I've read a lot of stories lately where that is not dealt with and we're supposed to see something as a happy ending when I'm like, no. So it's nice that this one did that. So I give it 4 stars. I really liked it. Next, I finished School Trip by Jerry Craft. This is the 3rd book in, I guess it is like a chronological series. The first one is New Kid, and I love this again. I don't know like really what different things I can say. I just think Jerry Craft is so incredibly smart and funny and talented. So this volume follows, we're still following the same like main characters. Like Drew and Jordan are still very much, you know, prominent and a part of the story, but kind of the focus character of this volume is Liam, who is one of their friends who's white. And he's kind of like, we get more about like his family kind of situation and everything in this one. And they all are on a school trip to Paris, France. And one thing I thought was really cool about that is Jordan is a really good cartoonist, and that's what he wants to pursue. And so it was really cool getting to see the way that he was like experiencing the art, and I just love this series so much. We also deal with one of the really unpleasant kids in their class, like a bully basically, and I really thought the way that like plotline was handled was so well done and so thoughtful, because it does such a great job of showing that like there might be circumstances that affect people, but also you are responsible for your actions and the way that you treat people. I love the friendships. I mentioned that I love the humor in these. I just think this is such a fun series that is also so thoughtful. I think the way that it looks at issues dealing with race and friendship and class. The series actually deals a lot with class and money, and I think it does that in a way that is really accessible to kids, but also very thoughtful. Like, Jerry Craft is a genius. I love him. I love this so much. I give School Trip 5 stars. Next, I finally read The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. I still don't know how to say his name. I've like seen him in interviews and I still can't remember. I'm so sorry. Here is an example of the illustration style. It's like very loose drawings, very cozy. And this book was like, it got a lot of hype when it came out, and I definitely see why. It's a very like warm and comforting and loving kind of book. Very cozy, and it's like a bunch of, there's like a loose framework for the story, but it's really more of a bunch of like insights and quotations. And I thought this was really lovely. I do want to mention that the text style can be a little hard to read. So I wanted to mention that, especially if you have some kind of vision impairment. I think that could be pretty difficult. But like in terms of what this book did, I think it did a good job with it. There were definitely some really lovely moments in it. I think maybe this is like a weird thing. So like I had heard the quotes from it, like these little snippets of like the lines on each page, and I think it's one of those books where like, because I had already been hit and affected by them at like an earlier time, I think maybe this book didn't feel as, like, it didn't have as much of an impact on me as I think it could have if I had known less about it, if that makes sense. But this was still lovely. I give it 4.5 stars. Next, I read the 5th book in the Entwined Tales series, that is A Little Mermaid by Aya Ling. So this is, of course, a Little Mermaid retelling, and I loved the setup for this one. This was one of the volumes in the series that I was most excited for because our main character is named Cleo, and she's actually in love with a merman prince. So she's a mermaid, and she's in love with this prince of another mer tribe. Has no interest in the human world or in the human prince. She thinks he's kind of like a doofus. But because of the family that we follow through most of the other books, because of their really incompetent, awful fairy godfather, there's this like misunderstanding, and she gets turned into a human. And she also loses her voice, and she hates both of those things. And so she's trying to figure out a way to get back to the ocean, back to her family, back to the guy that she actually likes. And then she starts spending more time with the prince, and of course maybe she ends up liking him more than she thought. And there's also a mystery in this book because there are these like assassination attempts that are happening, which I actually liked the mystery plot. I thought that was interesting, and yeah, I really liked this. I think it's a testament to how much I enjoyed the other parts of this book that like the romance didn't do anything for me, and I still had a great time with this. Like I think the idea of the romance could have been really cool, but I found the prince character, like the human prince, kind of like, I just found him kind of annoying. Like he's like a very specific kind of annoying where like he's like very flirtatious, like he thinks he's all that, and I just kind of wanted him to be taken down a peg. Like he honestly just bugged me, and I don't feel like he and Cleo had a lot of like really good or meaningful scenes together. So but I loved pretty much everything else. I loved Cleo as the main character. I thought the mermaid kind of world building and characterization was super interesting, and I really liked that. I thought as a Little Mermaid retelling, this was really creative and clever, and I really enjoyed it. And also, possibly my favorite thing about this book is that Aya Ling actually like writes the story in a way that Cleo is able to communicate with everybody, but like specifically her love interest, because that is one of the things that just really gets me about various different fairy tale retellings, because it's really frustrating because like even if you have a character who is either temporarily or, you know, permanently mute, there are still ways to communicate, and like people in the real world still have personality even if they don't have the same kind of communication like resources, you know, that other people might. And so that's always like really frustrated me. And so I really, really love that Aya Ling actually gives her main character like agency and personality and a way to like communicate with people, including the person that she is, you know, developing feelings for. So I really appreciate that. I also really liked the character of Nerissa and like her function in the story and her characterization. She was really fun. Yeah, I had a really good time with this. As I said, like the romance didn't do anything for me. And there was like a villain monologue near the end that was just frankly silly. But apart from that, I had a great time with this, and I gave A Little Mermaid 4 stars. Next, I finished The Art of Love and Lies by Rebecca Anderson. This is an arc I received in exchange for an honest review, and it is a proper romance. I think by the time this video goes up, I think my review already has been posted, and this book is already out. So this is a proper romance following Rosanna and what is our guy's name? Inspector Harrison. His first name's Martin, and he is a kind of like security chief, I guess. Like he works security for this like art museum, and the big deal exhibit at this art museum, it's like an early drawing of Michelangelo's that was like rediscovered recently, and so that is like the big, you know, the big hit of the gallery. Our other main character, Rosanna, she is a painter, and what she does is she paints basically like reproductions of really famous, well-known like paintings or art pieces that wealthy, like especially like the new money families, want to display in their home, and they're not trying to pass them off as real. Like Rosanna's not like forging these. There's no like attempt to deceive people. It's just this was a thing at that time, was that like it was like getting prints, you know. It was like people wanted to have that kind of social cachet of having this great master's work, even if it's not the real thing and you're not telling people it's the real thing. And so she ends up spending a lot of time at the gallery to kind of practice her art. She and Martin develop a relationship, and they really like each other. Things are going really well. But then there's a theft at the gallery or the museum, and the evidence seems to point to Rosanna. And so, of course, that creates a lot of friction. They end up, like, I kind of thought they were going to be, like, working on solving it together, but that's, like, kind of that's what happens, but also not really. And as I said, I will link my review if you want my full thoughts on it, but I was let down by this one, especially because I really enjoyed Rebecca Anderson's previous book. I thought the romance in that one was really well developed, like great slow burn. Some people thought too slow burn. This one was the opposite in that like the romance and like the interest in the other character just developed so quickly and so intensely that I didn't find it believable or interesting. Like I really didn't care about the main romance, and because of that, like that's a huge chunk of the book that I just wasn't invested in at all. And then I also didn't love the way that the plot played out. Like, I was looking forward to the mystery aspect, and like, I just, in general, I tend to like mystery subplots in other genres, but also I really love when the romantic interests have to, like, work together on a case. I just like that as a trope. And that isn't really what happened, and I don't feel like that was done super well. So, I don't know, there were some interesting ideas about, like, art and what counts as art that I thought were good. Like, there were things I like about it. I did really, like, I do like the way that Rebecca Anderson writes. But yeah, this was just kind of medium for me. I gave The Art of Love and Lies 3 stars. Next, I finally read Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I do have a copy of it, but I don't have it with me right now. I have been meaning to read this series, or to try it, for a really long time, even though I knew there was a good chance that I might not like it, because I had started reading Once Upon a Broken Heart, that series. Like, I read that first book and really, really enjoyed it. So I kind of wanted to go back and see if I liked the previous series, and spoilers, I did not. I did not like this first book. So the premise of this one, we are following our main character Scarlet, and every year there is this thing called Caraval, which is like this mysterious and beautiful and enchanting magical kind of circus or festival sort of thing, and she's always wanted to go, and she's never gotten an invitation. Like, you have to get an invitation. And then finally, basically the last year that she thinks she even has a chance, because she's being married off by her father to somebody she doesn't want to marry, her and her sister get a letter inviting them. And then Scarlet gets there, and Tella, her sister, actually gets kidnapped, and it turns out that that is, like, the game. Like, that is the I guess, mystery or the game or the focus of this year's version of Caraval, is that all the contestants are trying to find Tella. Obviously, Scarlet is very highly motivated because it is her sister who has gone missing. She also ends up sort of collaborating with this guy Julian. They end up kind of teaming up to work together and to try and find Tella and rescue her. So yeah, I did not have a good time with this one. I didn't care for the writing style. I remember seeing reviewers, like, because this book came out like a while ago. It was a big thing a while ago. And I remember seeing reviewers who did not care for the writing talk about how Stephanie Garber made Scarlet, like, I don't even know if you would call this synesthesia necessarily, but, like, sort of. Where she would, like, emotions had, like, colors or tastes or something. And it was just, I saw reviewers saying that, like, it seemed like an excuse so that Stephanie Garber could just write these, like, long strings of, like, descriptions that kind of didn't do anything. Like, they felt like they were there for no reason. It was just an excuse for more flowery language, and I definitely agree with that. I don't think that element was, like, necessary or used in a way that felt meaningful at all. And also just the description style in general just wasn't my thing. I also didn't really care for the plot of this one. Like, I found it very frustrating, and that partly connects to the characters. So, like, Scarlet as a main character, I didn't dislike her as much as I was worried about, because I listened to this on audio, and Rebecca Soler is the narrator, who, you know, absolute queen. We all love Rebecca Soler, and I think she did a really excellent job of making Scarlet feel better developed than she maybe was. But even with that, like, her decision-making process just made no sense to me. Like, the things that Scarlet was doing, the people that she was choosing to believe or not believe, no logic. No logic to be found. I just found it really, really irritating, and especially, and I know that other reviewers have talked about this as well, and I agree, like, she is told over and over that, like, this is all a game. This is only a game. Don't believe anything you see. It's only a game. And what does Scarlet do? She believes everything. Like, it was really frustrating because it didn't really make sense, especially because, like, you'd think if she's so set on getting her sister that she would try to play the game by the rules as best she could, which would involve, like, I don't know, paying attention to the whole point of the game, which is that it's a game. I don't know. It was really over the top. And I do understand, like, even if you're telling yourself that something isn't real, it could still be very upsetting to, you know, to see people that you love in certain circumstances, even if you're pretty sure it's not real. So I get that, but it didn't feel like that was happening here. It just felt like Scarlet was being dumb because the plot needed her to. And then also, I feel like this is one of those books where, like, the ending chunk had, like, all of these, like, twists and developments and revelations that, like, I just don't think were super effective for me. And maybe, like, you know, I wasn't having a great time already, so I'm sure that contributed, but it just felt, like, weirdly confusing and also kind of, like, ridiculous at times and weird. Like, I just did not care for those developments. There were like one or two choices Stephanie Garber made that I thought were like more unusual or creative, so that was nice. But like just in general, the things that we find out near the end, I had a hard time keeping track of, and it just didn't feel very cohesive or interesting. And another thing about this book, and maybe part of the problem, is that it was really boring for me. Like there were things happening, but the way it was written just wasn't super interesting. I wasn't super invested in like the story or the characters, and like honestly this book is just very forgettable for me. Like I know there were specific other things I wanted to talk about that I disliked, and I like can't remember them. Like this book just like left my brain, no thoughts, head empty. Like I have like nothing else to talk about after like these last couple points, even though I knew that there were specific things that I wanted to say. I usually don't have this problem with books. Y'all know I always have specific opinions about books, and this one I just can't remember them because it was just so forgettable for me. I also feel like the villains or the antagonists weren't super interesting or well written, and also one of the other writing things, which I think Sam from Thoughts on Tomes was talking about this like way back when she did her review. Another thing about the writing and the characterization that was very annoying to me is that like the way like characters would be able to tell things about people for reasons that did not exist. Like there were no reasons for it except that Stephanie Garber needed us to know. It's like a character like blinked in a certain way, and like Scarlett knew that meant that he was hiding information about her sister's whereabouts, or like something like so specific. And this happened a lot, and it was really distracting, and it just was very lazy. Like the author like didn't even bother trying to work this information into the story in a way that felt believable. And it also isn't even really characterization, you know? It's like just like plot or story things or like details that we need to know. It didn't actually make the characters feel like they had a personality, so like it wasn't even effective in that way. Honestly, the only part that like pleasantly surprised me, I guess, was the romantic part. Like I didn't love the romance. I didn't even really like it, but I was kind of worried that I would hate it. And I didn't. There were actually some scenes between Scarlett and the love interest that I thought were like better than I expected. And I also think, again, Rebecca Soler is a very talented narrator, so like sometimes I think that elevated characterization for some of these moments. But like, yeah, so I did not have a great time with this, but I am curious enough to try the sequel. Like I already own it, and I do have access to the audiobook, which again, Rebecca Soler, a joy to listen to. So I am probably gonna try it. Even though overall I would say that I am much preferring the sequel series, and one of the only reasons I even went back is because I knew that there were like spoilers. I found out after I read that first book that there are spoilers for the first series in that one. So anyway, that's why that's one of the reasons I tried, and I also own that book. So anyway, I give Caraval 2.5 stars, which is kind of funny to me because like thinking about it, I'm like, I had very little good things to say about it. I guess because like it at least was a fairly quick read, especially again because I was listening to it on audio with a narrator who I enjoyed. So maybe that sort of artificially softened my dislike of it. I don't know. Next, I finished Kapaemahu. It's by Hina Moana, Wong Kalu, Dane Hammer, and Joe Wilson. And the illustrations are by Daniel Souza. So this is a picture book by a Native Hawaiian author that has gotten, I feel like in the circles of people who read picture books, this has gotten a good amount of attention, and I totally see why. This was beautiful. It's a telling of one of the foundational stories of Native Hawaiians, about how I think they're travelers from maybe some Polynesian islands, who are these like divine beings who arrive to the islands that become known as Hawaii, and they teach the people there how to do different things. And these beings are also like gender fluid, and like this is like a foundational story of Native Hawaiian groups. And so this is a great example of how a lot of different Native groups had like ideas about gender that were much more flexible and much more open and accepting than a lot of like Western cultures. But like, so that's like not the main focus of the picture book, but that is an element that I thought was really wonderful to see. I loved this. I loved the story. It's not a story that I was familiar with before this. I loved the illustrations, and just like everything about this was really, really wonderful. I definitely recommend this. Whether or not you're somebody who usually picks up picture books, I think that this is fantastic. And I gave Kapaemahu 5 stars. Next, I finished Amber and Clay by Laura Amy Schlitz, illustrated by Julia Iredale. This was a reread for me, and this was for an episode of my Not a Genre book club. Hannah from Bell Gansen Books was my co-host, or my guest for this one, and this is a novel in verse that is set in ancient Greece, and we are following, there's a lot of like different point of views that we get, but the two main characters are a boy Roscos, who is a young enslaved boy, and a wealthy like upper class girl named Mellisto. And the story, like we follow them kind of growing up, the things that like happen in their lives, the new people that they meet, new experiences they have. We see the circumstances that they grow up in, like the way that this book portrays the way that enslaved people are treated, or that also like women are treated, I think is like a really phenomenal example of how you can have a historical book that is true to the time period, but through the way that it is written, it is still critiquing and like criticizing those elements. So we get a lot about these characters individually, and it's not until the very end of the book that they actually meet, but I still feel like their friendship is such a beautiful and strong part of this book, even though it starts so late. I just think Laura Amy Schlitz is an incredibly talented author, so for me that aspect was still convincing, but I don't want it to sell it to you as like, oh, they're great friends for the whole book, because like they don't even meet for like the vast majority of it. But yeah, this was a reread for me, and I loved it just as much the second time. I think the construction and the writing of this book is just really masterful. So there's some sections that are told in verse, there's some that are in prose, and the whole thing is kind of constructed by using like archaeological artifacts to tell the story, or to provide a framework for the story, which sounds very weird and like these pieces wouldn't fit together, but they really, really do. I think the actual writing style itself is also really wonderful. I really felt for Roscos and Mellisto. And Mellisto is an interesting character because in some ways she is kind of like a not like other girls thing, but I feel like the way that's used is to comment more on the treatment of girls than to act like Mellisto is just so much smarter and stronger than other girls, you know? I think thematically this book is beautiful. I also love that we get so many point of view sections from different Greek gods. Hermes is the one who has the most, and he is honestly probably my favorite character. I just loved him. I mentioned this when I first reviewed this book, but like the way he's portrayed I think is so interesting and skillful, because he's definitely, like Laura Amy Schlitz is definitely keeping in mind the way that he was characterized and portrayed in the actual Greek stories, but also she puts kind of her own interpretation on him, and I love the way that he is this like charming and clever, and you know, he gets into trouble. You know, he's one of the wild cards kind of the Olympians, but also he maybe has a little bit more of a heart than he wants us to believe. So yeah, I thought this was really, really wonderful. There was maybe like one kind of character plotline element that I think didn't feel as well integrated into the book, but thematically I see why that was there, so it doesn't really bother me. Anyway, I loved this again. I gave Amber and Clay 5 stars. Please check out our live show for a lot more thoughts. Hey y'all, so I somehow missed a book when I was putting together my stack of books to talk about in this wrap up. I don't know if I like misremembered when I read it or what, but I'm just gonna slide that review in right here. So I also read Doomsday Book by Connie Willis, who I had never read before, but she's won, I think she's like the record holder for Hugo and Nebula Awards or something like that. I don't know. She certainly has won a lot of them. She might be tied with N.K. Jemisin. Anyway, so she's like a classic of sci-fi and speculative fiction that I had never read, and this is like one of her most highly thought of and most well-known books. And I would say this reads like about half sci-fi and half historical fiction, but the historical fiction is connected to the sci-fi piece of it. So we are following our main character Kivrin, and there are two sort of timelines or two plot lines, but like they're not separate really, because one of the timelines is set like I think between a few decades and 100 years, I think, in the future. So things are different, but it is still like fairly recognizable. Like humanity's not like living on a spaceship, you know, but they do have time travel technology. And one of the things that they use this for is basically anthropology and like different kind of projects about like collecting history and knowledge and like studies and things like that. But there are some centuries that like they don't go back to because it's too dangerous. One of those is the 14th century. Like nobody gets cleared to travel there, like nobody can do it because it's just too dangerous. But then somebody else ends up in charge of the department for a little while, and guess what? He decides that he's going to make a name for himself by actually having that century like open up to travel and everything so that he can collect information and all of that. And our main character Kivrin is really excited because the 14th century has been one of her specialties. She studied it for so long, and she thinks that she's going to be like really prepared, that she can, you know, be inoculated against all the diseases, that she knows like the manners of the time and the language. Like they have like a really cool kind of plan for how she can like get like the language, get around the language issue, and how she can record her observations and all this. So she thinks she's set, and she goes back, and of course things don't go the way she's thinking. Things start going wrong, and it is like strangely connected to some things that are going wrong in the more modern setting as well. So this book is a lot. Like I always include content warnings in my wrap-ups, but I specifically want to mention that this book is very heavily a like pandemic kind of book. So just be aware of that before you pick it up. But I thought those elements were done really, really well. And some of the futuristic things that Connie Willis like imagined, it's kind of like unsettlingly accurate. Like she talks in vague terms about this like big pandemic that happened like a few decades ago, and the way that governments responded to that and how many people died. And then like when there's an outbreak, it's like one of the reasons that it hits so badly is that modern society doesn't think of those things as happening anymore. Like just things that felt very relevant to, you know, our pandemic experience. So I thought that was done really well. I thought the historical fiction elements were done so well. And I am somebody who does enjoy historical fiction. So, you know, if that's like one of your least favorite genres, but you like sci-fi, I don't know how you'd get on with this one, but I just found this incredibly compelling, even though so much of this is like quiet and character focused. Like most of it is, because the like race to figure out what's going on and if they can get Kivrin back and what's happening in the modern day. All of that I think is very gripping and more like plot focused, but the book overall is really about like people and people throughout time and how like, I don't know, like shared humanity and everything. Like there's a lot of it that's really, really beautiful, very, you know, heartfelt, very emotional and difficult in places. I do feel like some of the emotional parts were almost written in a way that were less emotional, that were kind of more distancing. But I do think that in a way kind of works with the story that is being told, or with the characters, like kind of having to just move on because you're in a crisis. Like, although it did kind of jar me the first couple times that happened, I do feel like maybe that was intentional and that was related to the kind of story that this was. So I thought this was really, really fantastic. I gave Doomsday Book 5 stars. My next book was Magic Steps by Tamora Pierce. This is the first book in the Circle Opens series, which is a sequel series to the Circle of Magic books. I'm so excited that I am in the kind of second series read along as well. Bethany has the live show on her channel. I will link that below, as well as my co-hosts. And yeah, I continue to love this series so much. So this second series follows the 4 kids that we meet in the first series as they're a little bit older. This is like a few years later, and they're actually going out into the world and kind of finding their own sort of apprentices. Like they end up coming across these kids who are younger than them and who have magical abilities that they need to kind of take under their wing. And this first one follows Sandry having that experience. She comes across a boy who has dance magic, and that's something that she hasn't heard of. That's something that people don't really know about. And so because there's no actual teacher for this magic, and because Sandry is the one who found him, she's the one who is responsible for training him. But then this is another book that has a mystery subplot, because there are these series of murders that are happening in the city that seem to be targeting this one merchant family. And so Sandry and some of the other characters are trying to figure out who this is, and they're trying to stop them. And they also end up finding that the way people are doing this, whoever is doing these murders, is by creating nothingness. And the way that that is described and like talked about in the story, I thought was very, very interesting. Like the stakes in this book are really high, and I think that like this series definitely reads more YA than middle grade, not because the middle grade series doesn't deal with dark things, because it really, really does, and some very upsetting things happen in those books, but like the amount of detail and focus I think is different here. But yeah, I love this. I love Sandry. I love all of these characters so much, and I think it is a sign of how good Tamora Pierce is at writing these characters, that even though I love like the whole gang being together. You know, I love their friendship and their dynamic. I still love following them individually as well. Like, I didn't feel like this book was lacking, even though we're only following one point of view. And I also loved the way that, like, Tamora Pierce is so creative with her magic in very understated ways, you know, because, like, it is kind of an elemental magic system, but the way that she plays with that, like the dance magic was fantastic. I love that Sandry has textile magic, just very, very cool. So I am continuing to have a fantastic time with these books, and I gave Magic Steps 5 stars. And then finally, the last thing I read in August was the Kumulipo, an account of the creation of the world according to Hawaiian tradition by Kealomoku, and this is the translation by Queen Liliuokalani, who was the last monarch of Hawaii. So this is exactly what it says in the title. It is a foundational spiritual story about the creation of Hawaii and about creation of different beings. So I'm not going to like give a star rating for this, you know, in the same way that I would for other things, but I thought this was really, really interesting. I'm really glad I read it. This also reminded me that I really want to read the autobiography that Liliuokalani wrote, like obviously about her own life. I just think that would be really interesting because she seems like such a fascinating person. But as far as the Kumulipo, there were sections that were more like lists, you know, but then there were also some really beautiful passages of poetry. So I feel like I don't have a lot to like review about this, especially because these are like sacred stories for a group, and so it doesn't feel right or even possible to review these in the same way, but I am very glad that I did read this. And as I said, there were just some really, really beautiful lines that stood out to me. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read for the rest of August, except for there's actually a bunch that I didn't talk about in this video because that was part of my vlog project that I did. It was another collab where I read a bunch of books for different middle grade and like children's book awards. I'll tell you guys now, there were actually a lot of hits in that video, so I will link that video down below. Please check it out. I called it a vlog, but it's really like is basically a wrap up. Like, I'm wrapping up all of those books, and there are definitely some big hits there, so please check that out. And yeah, let me know what you thought of any of these books, and if you're interested in any of them. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!